started since it's 10 o'clock. Anybody that comes in a couple minutes late, it's no big. They can jump in as we proceed. Thank you for joining me this morning. My name is Mike Sherman. I am the Community Outreach Manager at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs in the Community Gaming Grants branch. So my role specifically is to come out to speak with folks like yourselves, applicants, prospective applicants, anybody who's interested in the program, to provide a little background information on the program, how it works, how it's funded, those types of things, and to provide you with an opportunity to sort of put a face to a name. So my job is to connect with you directly, and if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, by all means, please raise your hand, ask the questions. The way I like to run these sessions is, ask the question in a moment when it makes sense. If something appears during the presentation that triggers an idea or generates a question, please just ask it then. That's the best way to approach it, I find. I also do have some questions that were actually forwarded to me from Joyce the other day, so I do have some responses and answers to those questions to share with you this morning. Good morning, thanks for joining us. Before I begin the presentation though, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're meeting this morning on the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. So it's important that we just acknowledge where we are. And those of you who are attending by live stream, wherever you are across the province as well, I'd just like to acknowledge the territories that you're on as well. So the presentation is going to probably take maybe about an hour and a half. It depends on how many questions you have. And afterwards, if you do want to connect with me one-on-one, I'm certainly happy to stick around and answer any additional questions you might have. I can give you my card as well. You're free to contact me at any time during the workday. Happy to help however you need. And I will also provide you with some contact information on additional people within the organization as well, and also some of our key partner groups who really do work closely in the field with people. I have an opportunity to connect with you at a high level, but in terms of actually doing some work directly on an application, like if you have really, really specific questions and need some sort of hands-on help, there are people that work on our behalf or partners with us to actually that can potentially help you with any specifics that you may have. Does anybody have any questions to begin with, just in terms of general kind of stuff before we start? Hi.
Will your presentation, your slides, not sure what's in them, but will they be available to us like online?
Absolutely, yeah.
Or emailed?
Yep.
Okay.
They actually are on our website now.
Oh, okay.
So I'll be able to share the link with you in just a minute. So yeah, it's all there. So it's transparent. It's there for you guys. This basically is to help you better understand the program. So the more that I can help you understand it, the more you can actually review the guidelines, those types of things, the better chance you are being successful with your application. So the presentation itself is about 20-ish slides. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through pretty much start to finish at a high level what you need to know to apply for it. Can I just get a show of hands? How many of you have applied before? Most of you. Okay. So we've got a few new people. We've got most of you who are frequent flyers, returnees, which is good too. I think it's just good to refresh for those of you who have gone through the program before what the program is all about. And the opportunity to meet with you face to face, I can answer a lot of sort of the nuanced questions that you might not get just in reading the guidelines. So these are the guidelines. So we have produced an updated version of the guidelines for 2018. So if you've gone through the program in the past and if you've read the guidelines on the website, you will be familiar with it. But what you're going to find is there are a few updates that we've made to the guidelines for 2018. I'm going to walk you through those. Not huge things, but they're important things for you to know. And the reason why I actually wanted to get in front of you folks today is because your sector intake period is now open. So as of February 1st, arts and culture sector intake for the grant program is now open. So it's important that, obviously that you get the information that you need right away. So the question was, can you get a copy of this presentation? The link that I've provided here on the bottom of the website, the slide I should say, I know it's kind of a biggie, but if you go to our website, you're going to find not only a copy of the guidelines, but you're going to find a whole bunch of other resources that are going to help you with the application process. You're going to find things like tutorials on how to actually fill out the application. You're going to find things like sample budgets, balance sheets, revenue expenses reports. You're going to find a frequently asked questions section. You're going to find all those things on the website. So take a photo of that if you like, or write it down. Either way, it's really good for you to familiarize yourself with the information that's on that site before you actually apply. It's amazing how many people I talk to, they'll say something like, I didn't know you had guidelines. It's like, well, it's kind of difficult for you to apply unless you know how the program actually operates and whether you're eligible and those types of things. So the better job you do of familiarizing yourself beforehand, the better your chances are of being successful with an application. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you through very high level the main parts of this presentation, of the guidelines, I should say. And just to start, just for context, it's important to understand that the program itself, the Gaming Grants program, it's designed to provide fair and equitable access to any eligible not-for-profit organization in BC that directly delivers programs and services to a broad public. So that's a very important definition to understand. So it's even written in the name, it's a community gaming grants program. This program is not designed to support like a small niche audience or a small group that just delivers services or programs to its membership. It's for and it's open to and it's inclusive of as broad a public as we can possibly get. Yes?
Can you define what a broad public is in regards to this?
Yeah, it's very different from audience to audience. So like if an arts and culture group, it could be anybody in the public who is interested in artistic performances or festivals or anything that would be arts and culture oriented that the public might be interested in. So it depends on what the program is. Like if you make it accessible, you make it available. If they choose to come, that you've done your best to make it a broad community. Yeah. Every sector is going to have a different audience, and every sector is obviously going to have different types of programs and services that it delivers. So the main part of the presentation is going to focus on the 4 primary elements of eligibility. In order to get a grant through this program, there's basically 4 things that you need to demonstrate and prove to the Community Gaming Grants branch. And so that's organization eligibility, it's program eligibility, it's financial eligibility, and it's also compliance. So that's if you get the grant. Afterwards, you need to demonstrate accountability of how you've used the funds in order to continue to be eligible for a grant in subsequent years. So we'll walk you through each of those parts in detail. And again, they're all in the guidelines anyway, so I'm just going to provide you with the nuances behind it and answer any specific questions you might have on that. The other thing about the program that's important to mention is there are 6 sectors. You guys are the first sector of the year. So as I mentioned, February 1st, arts and culture is opened. And we also provide funding to sport, PACs and DPACs, environmental groups, public safety, and groups in the human and social services. Each of those sectors applies at a different time of year, gets its funding at a different time of year. The other thing that you may or may not know is we also have a capital project grant, so we actually have technically a 7th sector. How many of you have heard about the capital project grant that we announced last year? A few, okay. So for others of you, this is new, and this may be something that interests you. So this is a $5 million grant that we introduced last year. So within the Community Gaming Grant program itself, if you get a grant, you can use a certain amount of the funding for minor capital sort of expenses or acquisitions or purchases. It's, I think it's up to $20,000 within your grant you could use towards that. The capital project actually gives eligible organizations, again, not-for-profits, it provides you with access to additional funding. So you could receive up to $250,000 towards your program. So it's a separate program. We're going to be reintroducing that one later this spring. So look for more information on our website. We will provide more details on that. Eligibility criteria is quite similar. So you need to demonstrate the same organization eligibility, program eligibility, and that type of thing. The key difference, and I'll just stop at that unless you have any questions, is the capital program is a competitive process versus the gaming grant one is not. So the gaming grant one, if you meet the standards, you get money. Depends on, you will get funding, it's just depending on what the level is. But in this capital grant program, it's a competitive one. So even if you're eligible, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the funding. So you're up against other organizations. So we basically, and across all sectors. So we rank them all. We have go through a formal adjudication process for that, and then come up with the awardees at the end. So just to close on that, this past year, we gave out the $5 million to 60 organizations across the province. And a quarter of those organizations were actually organizations in the arts and culture sector, 16 out of the 60. And it was a wide range of things. It was a number of groups that asked for things like, we need to renovate our theater hall. And there was another one that was, all our lighting equipment is all shot. We need to replace that. Or, we have IT infrastructure needs that we have. And there was another group that did a traveling festival, and they actually needed a couple vans in order to transport people and supplies around. So all of those types of things are good. And if you can demonstrate that need and create the compelling case, then potentially there's that opportunity for those additional funds.
And that's a maximum of $20,000 for that?
Well, yeah, just to clarify, in the community gaming grant, you can actually request funds for a minor capital thing. But if you have a bigger need, like $20,000 isn't going to replace all our lights.
That's what this is.
That's another avenue.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'm happy to answer any other questions if you have any.
So what is the percentage of the total budget that goes to culture?
The percentage? I'd have to look it up, but I think it's in the neighborhood of. I'm not. Don't quote me on it, but I think it's in the neighborhood of 18 to 20 million. I can certainly find that for you. But let me put it this way: the amount of money that is put forward for arts and culture is based on a 3-year historical average. So what we do is we track from year to year how many people apply, and what the total amount of funding requests were, and how much was actually allocated to that sector. And then in the subsequent years, we say, okay, well, that was how much we needed in the past. How much do we need again in the future? So that's how it's done. And our director of finance, or our director of the branch, what he does on a weekly basis, he's tracking all the applications that come in, the amount of money that is requested, the amount of money that's spent, and just sort of tracking that budget to make sure that we're actually on track with the right amount. Okay. Any other questions on that before we go on? So between the two sectors then, or between the two programs, I should say, the community gaming grants, $135 million a year, and we have that additional $5 million for the capital project grant. So there's $140 million per year that we distribute to not-for-profit groups. Okay. So how much can you get? So it depends on what level you're recognized at. So most organizations in the province are going to be considered a local organization. You could also be a regional, or you could also be a provincial, and there's different amounts of funding that are potentially available to an organization based on what level of programming it's at. So the important thing to understand here, I don't want to talk about too much, is that the funding levels are not guaranteed. So if you're a local organization, you can potentially receive up to $100,000 for the grant, but that's certainly not a guarantee. The amount of funding that you'll actually get depends on the size and the scope of the program that you deliver. And it also is based quite heavily on how much did it actually cost you to deliver the program in the previous fiscal year. So that's the key determinant. If an organization feels strongly that it is regional in nature, for example, what it needs to do is it needs to provide the branch with a business case that says, you know what, we actually deliver our programs and our services to a much broader audience. So essentially you need to, with your application, you need to provide sort of a little business case to say, here's the proof behind it. And so it'd be things like, okay, well, how many people do you serve? What is the breadth of the geographic region that you serve? Are there other organizations within this region that also deliver similar services? Are there other organizations within this region that look at you and say, you are the unique service provider in this broader region? So those are the types of things that you would need to do in order to demonstrate a case for moving up to that next level. So then what you do, like you do for the rest of your application, it's the same thing. You present the most compelling case that you can, and then our team, our analysts, will look at it and compare it against the guidelines and compare it against the conditions and all those types of things and say, how does it present? And so that's how you approach that. Okay. So I mentioned a minute ago, there's 4 things that you need to do to demonstrate eligibility to even get the grant. So the first of those, well, not the most important, but the first one is the organization eligibility. Is your organization itself eligible to get a grant? So you need to check off all these boxes to even be considered for a community gaming grant. Firstly, you need to be a not-for-profit organization. You don't have to be incorporated. Some of you may be. If you are incorporated provincially, you need to be in good standing with the BC registrar. If you're federally incorporated, you need to be in good standing with Industry Canada. But again, you don't have to be incorporated. Another biggie is you need to operate primarily for the community benefit. I mentioned that right from the beginning, and this is a biggie. And like when I read the questions, I could sense a bit of a sort of a pattern to them, and I'll address those again in the responses. But what I want you to understand is that, again, this program is largely for the community benefit. It's not for the benefit of the organization, the funding. It's for the benefit of the people that access the programs and services. Yeah?
So in the past, some arts organizations have been told that their subscribers and their ticket buyers are considered to be members, not community, and therefore have been disqualified under this one. It's a big sore spot because there's a, as I'm sure you know, a huge history in the past of arts organizations being disqualified under this particular bullet.
The people who are purchasing the tickets are considered members of the organization?
Correct, and the subscribers are considered, so not solely in there's a very fuzzy line apparently in the minds of some people between community benefit and members. So there have been in the past arts organizations that have been disqualified. For example, an organization with a large subscription base, so a large number of their attendees would be subscribers. Those were then deemed to be members, and the organization was not allowed, was not funded, even though, you know, there was many of them. So I think maybe where the problem is that defining the difference between community benefit and members isn't in the arts as black and white as it is with an organization that has a membership fee that you pay and you're a member and then you get to go skating in the ice rink or whatever it might be, right?
Okay.
So it's very, so if you could really be clear about what the difference is between the community and the members, specifically around the arts, subscribers and ticket buyers, that would be so helpful.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple things come to mind. I'm going to talk about subscriptions and those types of things when I get to the financial eligibility. So we're going to talk about deferred revenues and those types of things, which I think some of you will probably, that'll be helpful for you to get some insight on that. But in terms of the membership itself, so if I'm hearing you correctly, just tell me if I am or not.
Yeah.
So let's say you run a, I don't know, what do you run?
I run the Vancouver's Cultural Center, and
Okay.
we do receive gaming funding.
Okay, so give me an example of a type of program that you would do.
Well, the 2 programs we're
Okay.
funded for are our youth program and
Okay.
our series, which is 24 shows in
Okay.
a season.
Okay.
Now, some of the people that attend that are subscribers. Most of the people that attend that are just the general public who buy tickets. But you could have an organization, say, like Bard on the Beach, where you have a large number of subscribers, like the general.
subscribers. We don't have subscribers.
You don't have. Okay,
So-
not Bard on the Beach. Let's
Okay.
say the Arts Club.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when you say subscribers, are you talking about, for example, we're going to put on this season of events,
Yes.
and in advance of the season of events, we're going to sell tickets,
We're going to sell a pass for
a pass.
5 shows.
Okay, so that's deferred revenue. So I'll speak about that in a bit. So you're bringing in money in advance of the season, right?
Basically, yeah.
Okay, so I got some good news information for you on that in a bit.
Okay.
So those people, that's the general public who are coming to attend your event. It's the general public. I don't see an issue with that. Okay,
And sometimes,
but
sorry, if I could just
Yeah.
clarify. In some arts organizations, being a subscriber gives them voting privileges at the AGM. So they are considered members, voting members.
okay,
And that's where the fuzziness comes in because they are the public,
mm-hmm.
but because they are subscribers, not the single ticket buyers,
Yep.
but subscribers, they are eligible to vote at the AGM.
Great. You know, that's
So are
good.
they
That's,
considered community
they're considered
or
both.
members?
They're considered both. Okay, so you've actually done a few things here, and you've actually addressed most of the bullets there. So what the bullets there is talking about is that's talking about governance. That's talking about sort of the voluntary framework behind what we need to see, right? So we need to see that the people who are involved in the management and the organization, the management, the operation of the organization, they need to be volunteers. They need to come in with the approach that, you know, we're doing this as sort of a broader civic-minded kind of approach than just what is of interest to the organization. So if people who come in from the public are part of the governance and the voting structure and part of the AGM voting membership, that's great because they're approaching it with the interests of the community at heart. Okay, so does that sort of start to answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a
Okay.
start, yeah.
Okay, so if you can, you need to demonstrate to us in the application that there is that democratic process for board of director appointments. And you need to demonstrate that you have a BC focus, so the people that, you know, the general public, they purchase your tickets, that gives them the opportunity to also now vote at the AGM. Okay, that's great. I don't see an issue with that. I think what's important to do in that particular situation is if you think there's something unique about your situation, or you don't think you know, it might present itself well, again, you can reach out to me or you can reach out to anybody in our branch and sort of ask that question. We're happy to answer any questions you have in advance of actually doing that application to make sure that you're on side with the guidelines. Okay. So just to finish up, the board members again need to be democratically chosen. 2/3 of them need to be residents of BC. And also when they're in a position on the board, they can't be remunerated for their role on the board, right? And they certainly can't be remunerated using gaming funds while they're on the board. So if you check those boxes off, you're in good shape in terms of the organization eligibility. If you hit any of these points though, unfortunately the organization would be out of luck in terms of getting the grant. So if it's a for-profit organization, if it's any level of government, federal, provincial, First Nations, municipal, ineligible for the grant, politically oriented, political parties, action groups, lobby groups, those types of things. I think the main one that would be of relevance here that I would need to bring to your attention is if you're like a museum or a gallery or one of those types of things, if you're provincially or federally or municipally operated, you wouldn't be eligible for a grant. The nuance here, I'm actually doing a presentation to the BC Museums Association in a couple days, and some nuance I'll share with them as well is it doesn't mean you can't have municipal, for example, representation on the board. So operated means like in its entirety. Like, so if you were, for example, an art gallery and you're housed within a municipal facility of some sort and the municipality actually operated it, that's out of luck. But if as part of it, say for example, you know, the municipality says, we're going to give you some space within our building for free rent or reduced rent or whatever it may be, but one of the conditions is we need to have some representation on your board, like say 1 or 2 individuals, that's okay. They're not controlling your board. The board is controlled by the organization, and the organization is influenced by the broad public that elected its board. Okay, so you see the nuance there? Okay. So that's organization eligibility. Nobody's got up and walked out of the room, so I'm assuming you all checked those boxes. Okay. Especially those of you who have already been successful applicants in the past and are in good shape. So we don't fund programs though, or sorry, organizations. We fund the programs that organizations deliver. So this is the part that's key for you to, for me to share with you this morning, is the program eligibility part. So in order for the programs that your organization delivers to the public to be eligible, you need to demonstrate 4 things. You need to demonstrate that the program, again, I'm sorry if I keep mentioning this point, but it is probably the key point, is the program needs to demonstrate clear benefit to the broad community. It needs to be accessible and inclusive. It needs to be sustainable. and it has to have been delivered for at least 12 months before you apply for the grant. So I just want to speak a little bit about each of those, in particular for the arts and culture sector. So for example, to demonstrate a clear community benefit, an arts organization could, in its program description, which I'll talk about in a sec, could demonstrate, okay, well, the way that we show clear community benefit is we provide opportunities for the public to come in and, partake in this artistic expression of whatever sort it may be. Maybe it's a gallery, or maybe it's a musical production, or whatever it is. The public has every opportunity to come in, and it could be things like, at a reduced cost, so that everybody has access to it. And it could be things like opportunities for the public to come in and try art themselves. Like, maybe you offer a program where you deliver workshops to the public on, how to paint, or how to put on a theater production, whatever it is. You need to provide those opportunities to show that all aspects of the public have an opportunity to take part if they're interested. In terms of accessibility and inclusiveness, it's things like it needs to be open to all cultural groups, ethnicities, different ages, different orientations. Anybody who would potentially be interested in it has the ability to come in and take part. In terms of the sustainability, you need to demonstrate that the program, if funding is reduced or if it's eliminated, that you do have some plans in place to keep the program operational in the future, that you've actually put some thought into things like budget and those types of things that are going to help the organization be self-supporting. And the last one's pretty clear, just 12 months at the time of application. And again, we just need to get assurance from the organization that the program has actually been around for a while, it's got itself on its feet, and that we'd actually be supporting an organization that actually has a bit of a history to it. Does anybody have any questions on that? Yeah.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit in more detail about proving sustainability? I think for a lot of arts organizations, it's very difficult to be able to say, well, if we don't get this gaming funding, it's fine, we got couch cushion money, so we've got another 20K here to be able to provide this program. So what realistic and other than just kind of like fancy shell game information, what really practical, realistic sustainability proof are you looking for?
So there's a couple ways you can do it. One, it could be things even like, support and evidence from the community that this is a program that we really value. So that's kind of that qualitative kind of thing as well. But really, where it's also going to come into play is when we talk about the financial eligibility part of the organization in this act, because when we get into things like the budget, and things like the budget, it's going to be, okay, can we clearly see through your financials that you've thought about what it's going to take for your organization to be self-perpetuating in the future. So we're going to look closely at financials. And, I'll go into that in more detail, but let's just say for the moment that, we're not looking to, if an organization has received funding in the past and it's doing well and it's continuing to demonstrate that it is viable, we're looking to try to continue to support it and help this organization. Okay, so we're trying to meet you kind of halfway on that, right? Okay. There was another question? Okay. So, carrying on with the program eligibility part, so when you get to the application, to the point of actually writing the application itself, there's a section in the online application called program description. This part's hugely important. And this is actually one of the parts of the process that I help people with the most. And what I often find in terms of the program description is what I read in an application or what our analysts read actually presents itself quite differently than if I was to sit down with you and say, can you tell me about your program? Just tell me about your program. What do you do? What do you deliver? What are the services? What's the value? It often presents quite differently. So this is the part of the application that really encourage you to spend quite a bit of time with. Some of you may hire grant writers. Some of you probably do it yourself. Whatever the case may be, whether you write it or a grant writer does it, this requires some thought and this requires you to really pitch a good story. So what we're really looking for in this section is very much what I just mentioned to you in terms of the program eligibility. Demonstrate to us that the program has been around for a year, so talk about that. Tell us what you're doing for it to be sustainable. Tell us what you're doing to show that it's accessible and inclusive to a broad public. And tell us how your program is benefiting the community. This doesn't need to be Shakespeare. This is not a thesis. You don't have to write this huge fancy thing. Tell us concisely and clearly about your program. Remember that whoever is reading this, the analyst who's reading this, you know, they may know something about your program. Chances are they don't. And chances are they're not an expert in your particular field or your particular subject area or even necessarily the sector. Our analysts are generalists. They're looking at applications across 6 sectors. So you need to approach it as if you're approaching somebody who has a rudimentary understanding of your business. Tell them what they need to know. So I say that, but still I read things and it's like, okay, it's easy to start talk about the qualitative kind of parts of it and what the value of it is and that type of thing. That's great, but we're trying to get those 4 things first and foremost, okay? And if there's information, for example, on your website that you think would support your program application, throw in a link, but point the person directly to what you think is of the most important. And maybe it could be things like, we've got a testimonial page on there as well. You can, again, that's a qualitative thing, you can put it in there, but that should sort of be a supplementary thing to hitting those key points. Hugely important on there that you work on that particular section and present it well. Okay, so just finishing up with the ineligible programs. So much like where you could be an ineligible organization in its entirety, you could be an eligible organization but deliver an ineligible program. So if you provide services that are exclusive to your organization's membership, you're not going to receive funding. If you provide financial assistance to individuals, so I'll give you an example. If you're an umbrella arts organization, and within your membership you provide funding to artists to support their personal or professional growth, you could not use gaming funds towards that because that's money that goes to support an artist as opposed to directly benefiting the broad community. Fundraising activities, so if you host like a gala or have like a, this would be a biggie, say in human and social services, for example. Let's say you run a thrift store, for example, and the sale of the proceeds actually helps fund your organization. It's fine if you do that, but you can't use gaming funds towards those types of events or activities. Vocational training, so like professional development, employee training programs is ineligible use for funds. And if you have like say for example, a contract or a funding agreement with another level of government, we don't, you can't double dip in terms of using community gaming grant funds for that as well. Yeah, hi.
Hey again.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you talk about vocational training as it applies specifically to the arts, especially vis-a-vis what you said earlier about how you could provide a program to the public that teaches them about how to engage in the arts. So how does that differ? Like so I come from Playwrights Theatre Center, so if we have a program that's open to any member of the public to come in and learn more about how to write plays. Is that vocational if they're learning how to write plays, or is it a community service because these are members of the public who are interested in learning about how to engage in arts?
It depends on what the attendee's ultimate goal is. If it's just to, say produce something for their friends and just the general public, if they're not trying to make a living off of it, that's different, right? But if you're running a program that says, okay, all you professional artists come in, we're going to deliver this thing to you that's going to improve your professional understanding and development, and then you can go forth and sell your wares, that's ineligible.
Okay, but so like realistically, most people who are playwrights are not making their living as playwrights. And so
no, they're not.
And they're not.
Are they trying to?
Right, and they're not a part of they're not a part of any professional organization or association. So then would they be considered members of the general public?
Yeah, if they're doing it just for interest and just for their own, almost like a hobby kind of thing.
Financially, technically, yes. I mean, all of them have other day jobs.
So it's going to really come down to, you know, I've shared with you the guidelines, right? So it really comes down to how you present it. It's like if when you present it, you have to be very clear. It's like, who is your audience? What is their intent for coming and taking part in this program? Okay, if their intent in taking part of this program is to improve their professional standing so that they can benefit professionally and commercially from it, that is ineligible. If their intent to come and take part in this is, hey, that's really cool, I'd just like to learn how to do that on the side, that is potentially eligible. So that's
That's a tricky one to
Yeah.
handle in
Okay.
the arts, huh?
yeah. Well, and again, all I can share with you is that's the guideline, and you need to sort of figure out where your audience fits in on that. Yeah. Yep, back row.
Let's say that 99.9% of what you do in the program is eligible. It's just important to leave aside what is not eligible and not present it in the application, right?
So what's your question?
The question is sometimes that an organization might realize that there's just one element they do in the year that would be training for artists.
Oh, I see.
So
Okay.
it's important to realize that's not going to be funded in this
Yep.
program. So present what
Yeah.
the rest of what you do that's eligible, and
Yeah. So the way you need to think about that is there a distinction between what you call a program and what we call a program? Right? So what you're applying for us is a program that would in its entirety be eligible. So if your program is this big and you figure only 90% of what you deliver here would be eligible to us, you only apply for that 90% of your program and call it the program for this. Does that
yeah,
make sense?
that's what
I'm just going to the next bullet there again, just to be super clear, because these have all been fuzzy things sometimes in the past. Are delivered on a contract or under a funding agreement. Many organizations receive funding from the BC Arts Council, the city, the Canada Council, all of those kinds of sources.
Yep.
Now, can you clarify just?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can. So how many of you receive funding from BC Arts Council? Probably a bunch of you. Very nice folks. They work in the same building as me. So that type of funding, and I'll talk about it in a bit when we get to the financial part, that part is okay. So you're allowed a certain amount of funding from government. So when we talk about things like this grant program, we talk about things like the BC Art Council grant program. Those aren't like really hard contractual things or funding agreements. Like say, for example, if you're a health authority and you actually had a contract with the Ministry of Health to deliver very, very specific services, and you have a general service agreement with all these formal deliverables and all that kind of stuff, that's a real hard contract, right? The community gaming grant, you don't get a contract like that. It's a set of conditions. It's a little bit softer. It'd be the same thing with BC Arts Council, right? So those aren't what you would call a contract per se or a funding agreement per se. It's a grant award, so it's a little bit different. So if any of you have like an actual contract with a government agency, for example, that would be a different thing. Does that answer your question?
I think there's one that's a bit, again, fuzzy, which
Yeah.
is the Arts Presentation Fund, which is Canadian Heritage.
Okay.
Those are not called grants, they're called contribution agreements.
Okay.
So they're not contracts and they're not grants, but they live somewhere in the middle.
So your best approach in that situation would be to contact the branch and just explain that situation. You know, before you apply for it, let's just find out more about what that actually is.
And who would know that?
Well, just you can share that with me, and I'll pass that to our team.
Okay.
Mike, I've
Yeah.
got two questions about
Sure.
eligibility from the stream. The first one is, do you mean a program in operation 12 months from the date of the application deadline, or the date of expected approval, or beginning of the apply for program start dates? Just clarifying what that is.
It's at the date of application. So the question is, in order to be eligible for a grant, how long in advance of the application do you have to have demonstrated the program has been in operation? So it has to be 12 months. So the date that you apply is the starting date that we would look back on. So has the program operated for 12 months prior to that date of application?
Great.
And there was another question?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
A question question about the definitions of what a program is. Could an entire concert season be considered a program, or does it have to be a specific event or activity?
No, in fact, you would want to just say, I'll give you an example for the museums, like I'm doing this presentation later in the week. And so they say, okay, well, what is a program? So a program for them, for example, would be public exhibitions, as opposed to we're doing an exhibit on ancient Egypt. Okay, the ancient Egypt one would have a very finite period of time, and then it's gone and they'd move on to ancient Greece. But the educational exhibitions is the ongoing thing, regardless of year. So one's finite and the other one is a longer period of time. And so then there's also the difference between what is a program and a project. So a project would have a definite start and end date, versus your program is something that, you know, if your organization is sustainable, will continue, right? You know, we'll have a whole bunch of projects within it. So that sort of answers your question at the back, sir, is like, what parts of my program are eligible? And it's like, you may have a bunch of like sub-programs or projects within it, but we're looking at the broader picture there. Okay, so we talked about organization eligibility, we've talked about program eligibility. The next part that you need to demonstrate is the financial eligibility part. So there's two components of this that I'm going to share with you. One is the organization itself needs to be financially eligible, and also the program or programs for which you're applying for funding, they also need to be eligible, or financially eligible. So we'll start with the organization itself. And again, all of this is in the guidelines. I'm just giving you the more context behind it. For the organization to be eligible, and those of you who already get grants will know this, you need to set up a separate gaming account with us. And essentially what that means is you go to your bank, you open up a separate account, you need to order checks for your account, and you need to provide the branch with a void check from that account, and it needs to be specifically called gaming account. It has to have that printed on it. And the reason we asked you to do this is because if you're successful in getting a grant, we're going to deposit the money right into that account, so we need the account information for that. Sometimes what happens is an organization will get a grant, and then for whatever reason they take a year or two off, and then it's like, oh, let's apply for another grant. Get the grant, we go to stick the money in the account, check bounces back to us. The account is closed for inactivity, so make sure if you have an account that you make sure it's active at the time of your application, otherwise that could potentially happen. So that's that. In terms of the financial eligibility part for the organization, there's three things that would make you ineligible. One is if your organization, and this doesn't actually apply to many groups, but if your organization earned more than $250,000 in its previous fiscal year through different gaming activities, so that would be things like the grant you get from us, let's say you have a government licensed raffle or a bingo, those types of things. If you make this whack of cash, you're going to be ineligible because why do you need our money? You guys are flush with cash. Okay. On the flip side of that, if the organization, if there's a significant doubt as to the financial viability of the organization, let's say you operate in a deficit position for multiple years, then that's going to be looked at as that might not be a great investment for public funds. We're not going to say that, okay, well, 2 years ago, you guys were in a good position, and last year all of a sudden, wow, what happened? And then cut you off because, you know, maybe you had a year that had really high expenses for some reason. You had to replace a roof, or something was really there was an anomaly that year. We're not going to look at 1 year's dip and say, oh, you're out. We're looking for a pattern there. Okay, and again, the idea is we want to make sure that we invest this limited pool of public money in organizations that really need it. There's like over 6,000 groups that are interested in getting that funding, so we want to make sure it goes to the groups that really need it the most, and that can demonstrate that they're going to be viable. The third part, and I'll talk about this in some detail, is the organization can't have more than 50% of its previous year's operating expenses on hand at the start of the next year to run the business. So there's a calculation here that the branch is going to use to determine whether you fit within that ballpark. And this comes down to the financials that you provide. Can everybody see this okay? Okay. So what the analyst is going to do is they're going to look through your financial statements, And they're going to pull out key pieces of information in order to determine whether you're above or below that 50% threshold of being eligible for the funding. They're going to look at your assets for the organization at the end of your fiscal year. So they'll pull that out of your financial statements. And then they're going to start subtracting things. They're going to subtract things like the gaming funds. How much money did you get from the grant last year? How much money did you get in terms of you know, the raffles and the bingos, those types of things. And they're going to start subtracting that. Liabilities, what does the organization owe? So here's the part that I mentioned to you earlier about deferred revenues. Somebody mentioned earlier about preseason ticket sales, subscriptions. So this is the part that's important to understand, is in the past, those were actually considered to be revenue or assets for the organization. It's money in your account, right? It's actually also a liability for you because you can only spend it on that production or that festival or whatever the event is, right? You can't spend, or technically you shouldn't. You shouldn't spend it on other things. That's what the people gave you the money for. So it's actually a liability to the organization. So we will subtract that from the amount of money in this calculation. Any groups here have internally restricted funds? You know, your board has said, okay, you know, we're going to have to, you know, purchase new equipment, or we're going to have to replace this, we're going to have to upgrade that. Okay? So if your organization has internally restricted funds, that's also removed from the calculation. What you're going to need to demonstrate here is if you do have internally restricted funds, we need to see proof of it. So you need to provide, in your financial statements, there needs to be a note to that effect. You also will need to provide the minutes from the board meeting or the AGM where those funds, the board has approved the restriction of those funds. We need to see that proof. Externally restricted funds. Let's say you have a benefactor who makes an endowment to your organization and said, I would like to bequeath, I would like to give you $100,000 to run your season. You can only use it for this. So it's been donated by somebody externally for a particular use. We won't hold that against you in terms of an operating fund because it's been restricted. Same thing, you need to provide that evidence to the branch of what those are. So do all that crazy math, and then we multiply it by, or divide it by your previous year's operating expenses, and you will come out with this number. If the number is above 50%, your organization is ineligible to get the grant. If it's below 50%, you're in good shape. So as you can see, the more things, it's like doing your taxes. The more things you can take off your income, better return you're going to get, right? It's the same thing here. The more things you can subtract, the more likely you are to get a grant. Is there any questions on that? Yeah.
What if your balance is negative? Is that looked at
It is.
poorly?
Yeah, because that would actually put you into this situation here, right? So you don't, because at the end of the day, what the number represents is how much money do you actually have on the positive side of your ledger in your bank account to run the organization, right? And if your number's in the negative, you're actually in the hole. And again, what I want to make clear is we're not out to penalize organizations. What we're looking for is, like, let's say you're like -5, -10%. We're not going to say, boom, you're out. That wouldn't be very nice. We're looking for a prolonged sort of pattern that demonstrates that this isn't a good risk for government money. Yeah.
I have a question. We are in a kind of a loose partnership with another organisation, and we operate a facility owned by the city of Surrey, and we share the operational expense of that. We together, the other organisation and ourselves, wrote a grant application to Creative Clusters for which we got $40,000 for capital improvements. The other organisation is very much behind us in terms of operational experience and so on and so forth, and so the $40,000 sat in our bank account. Now, I applied for an increase in our gaming grant last year, and I didn't get it, even though our programs had increased, and that $40,000 sat in our operational account. No, actually, I created a separate account for it to sit in.
Yeah.
And I provided a note that this was not our money, this was joint money, but in actual fact it didn't even belong to us. It was to be used specifically for capital improvements on this facility, on this studio. Would that have been, even though I provided a note, it wasn't, I mean, I didn't know about this restricted funds things, because
Yeah.
I'm not very sophisticated when it
Yeah.
comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
Would that have counted against us even though I put a little note? Because we didn't get an increase.
So it depends on the process of how that money was set aside, right? So like I said, it needs to be something that the governing body for the organization needs to have approved that. So that we just need to get that clear demonstration of that.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't go through the board because
Yeah.
it wasn't our money, it wasn't our organisation.
Whose money was it again? Sorry?
It was granted from the province. It was granted to the studio to be administered by the other organisation and ourselves for capital improvements in the studio. In other words, it didn't belong to either of us, although we got the money.
Yeah.
It was specifically earmarked for improvements on the studio, which it eventually was
Yeah.
spent on, so that wasn't an issue. The issue was that the other organisation was not as advanced as us, so they didn't have the infrastructure to hold that $40,000.
Okay.
Obviously, we couldn't just hold a check.
Yeah.
It had to go into an account, and it went into I created another account, which I titled the name of the studio. And then I put a note on my application to gaming saying this is not our money in any way, shape or form. And we're purely holding it, keeping it warm until it gets dispersed.
Okay.
And I asked for an increase in our gaming funds, which I'm not saying that this affected, but I had hoped that our programs had grown, that we would get a slight increase, but we didn't. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering if I didn't, I don't know if that affected it, if I didn't make it clear enough. I didn't know about this restricted funds thing.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things that are kind of going through my mind on that. One would be like, what was the other government agency that you got the money from? It wasn't our program.
It was from the province. It was a program called Creative Clusters.
Okay.
From the province of BC. It was a pilot program, and I think we were one of the first clusters,
Yeah.
if you like,
Yeah.
to get monies
Okay.
under that.
So I think part of the answer to your question may come up on this slide here.
Oh,
So that was the organization eligibility part, and I mentioned too that the programs for which the organization applies, they also need to be eligible. So if you're within the 50% surplus calculation, you're good, then we'll look at the programs. So we're looking deeper into your financials. And so this may address your question here. So in order for the program itself to get the funding, you can't get more than 75% of the cost to run it from federal and provincial sources. So that could be the gaming grant, that could be the other program, it could be federal funding, it could be a bunch of different things. And in our guidelines, there's actually a list of what we consider to be provincial and federal sources in Appendix 4. So these are all the sources we'd look at and say, okay, well, in your financial statement, you said you got funding from this source. Is it one of these? And if it's one of these, we would consider that to be federal or provincial funding. So we're just going to add them up and say, okay, well, with what you got from that source, plus what you got from this source, plus what you're going to potentially ask for gaming, is it above or 75% of the total cost you say it's going to take to run the business or the program? And if it is, you've demonstrated program eligibility. But if you're in excess of that, it would potentially jeopardize the funding. So that could be potentially something that would be looked at as part of
No,
that.
it was very that was for capital improvements to a building, and our program application was quite separate.
Yeah, I need to know more about it. Maybe we can just sort of chat offline
Okay.
about that. Yeah, sort of look at that in a bit more detail. So yeah, so this is the 75% threshold to get the program funding. So that means, you could get funding from federal and provincial sources to cover 75% of what you figure it's going to cost to run the operation, that particular program or service, which means the remaining 25% is up to you and to your community to fill in the gap. So the remaining 25% can come from a variety of sources. You could get, say for example, a municipal grant. So you could get a grant from the City of Vancouver to run your organization's program. You could do fundraising. You could get in-kind contributions. This is a biggie. Like a lot of the groups that we fund, the 25% comes up very heavily from in-kind contributions, volunteer time, donations of equipment, donations of labor, those types of things. That all counts towards your 25%. So what you need to do when you submit your application is you need to find a way, you need to be able to monetize that. So what you do on our website, there's an example on there. It's an in-kind contribution template. So what you need to do is you need to track over the course of the fiscal year how many volunteer hours, for example, do people contribute towards this over the course of the year. Add them all up, you multiply by $20 an hour, and then you get a number. Okay? Also within your financial statements, you're going to need to add up, like if people donate labor, let's say, some group, you need to build an outdoor amphitheater to do a summer festival, and the local lumber yard donates a pallet of 2x4s. Okay? What's the value of that? So you need to add up the value of all these things, add it into your budget or into your financial statements, and then we'll look at it and say, does all of that add up to at least 25%? And if it does, you're in good shape. You filled your 25% that you need to fill in. Okay? Yeah?
I guess, does corporate sponsorship fall in that 25% under like fundraising or something?
Local car dealership wants to donate vehicles to help you transport performing artists from one place to the other, use them for the summer season. Yes.
Or marketing companies who want to buy, rent space on our outdoor event to sample to the public their new product or something like that. Still counts.
Yeah. That would be an interesting one. I think we'd want to probably learn a little bit more about that, right? Because that's when it starts to bleed into a little bit of that commercial part, right? Like, because they've got an ulterior motive for doing that, as opposed to they're trying to benefit the community. They're also trying to benefit themselves, right? Through advertising. Yeah. Yeah. I think we could talk that through a bit more. I think that would be a good one. Any other questions on that? So we've talked about, yeah, hi.
Does membership fees come into that 25%?
Yes. Yeah, that would. So that would sort of be kind of like a fundraising thing, right? Like, you charge people. Are you talking about, are we back to the subscription thing kind of?
Not a subscription, no.
Okay.
It's another kind of organization, which is a volunteer organization, but there's a small membership fee too.
Yeah, to help finance the organization. As long as it keeps you in a not-for-profit position.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Another
Yeah.
question from the stream here. I'm just going to read this out. The way we budget artist fees, such as for artistic director, are budgeted in operations and not across each individual event. So when submitting the budget, can we distribute this pay across the events?
One more time?
Yeah, the way we budget artist fees, so for artistic director, are budgeted in operations and not across each individual event. When submitting the budget, can we distribute this pay across the events? And they say, we do not distribute the pay across the events right now, but they are very much a cost of putting on the events within the project.
So we're looking at the costs for the entire program. So they're talking about they have costs for this person across the entire organization as opposed to the program. So if they're applying for a specific program, so I'll give you an example and we'll see if this answers the question. So if an organization delivers 1, 2, 3 different programs and it's only applying for funding for 2 of them, if they have somebody who provides support for that organization across all 3, what they need to do is they need to break out the 2 that they're applying for the funding for. And the other one, they wouldn't provide us financials for that because they're not asking for support for that. So they're asking for support for these 2. So they have to sort of prorate that. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so just very quickly, financial documents. In order for us to do those calculations I just mentioned, you need to provide financial statements for the organization and also for the program. If the program, like I just said, you could have 2 or 3 programs and only 2 of them you're funding. If your organization, let's put it this way, if your organization just does one thing, and that one thing, that one program is what you're applying for, then you don't need to provide separate program financials because your organization financials are the same thing. But if you offer 3 programs and only 2 of them you're asking for funding for, you need to provide us a separate set of financials for the program. So we need to see a balance sheet, your assets versus your liabilities, a revenue expenses statement for the previous year. What were your costs, what were your incomes, what did you bring in? And if there's any notes, for example, in your particular case there in terms of the restricted funds, That's where they would appear, is in that financial statement. And we need the budgets. And the budgets very simply are, we talked about sustainability a bit earlier, that's just sort of provide the branch that sense of confidence that you guys have put some thought into where you see your organization going in the next year. So we need to see a budget for the coming year, and we need to see a budget for the next year after that. So it's just, again, it's just that sense of confidence you guys have thought about what you need to do and what your costs are going to be and how you're going to cover that. Okay, any questions on that? Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. The next fiscal years, how many next fiscal years?
Okay, so right now we're in March 2018. So you need to provide us the budget for this fiscal year, the 2018-2019. And then you need to provide us the 2019-2020, or the next year after that.
So
So
18-19 is this year,
Yep, and then the next year, the next fiscal year after that.
19-20.
Yeah.
So that's really the current fiscal year
It's-
would be 18-19.
So it's the year in which you're applying,
Yeah,
and then the next year after that 12-month cycle ends.
right, so it's one next.
Okay, so it's the current,
And one,
it's the current budget and the
plus
next
one.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Was there
It was
another-
because of
Yeah.
the grammar
Yes.
of the sentence.
Yeah,
I just wondered how many nexts.
yeah, just one next.
Yeah.
One now, one next.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there another question, sir? Did you have it? Okay. All right, the application. So you're eligible. You ticked off all those boxes. How do you actually apply? Those of you who apply know that that application is entirely online. So we'll talk about how you actually apply in a sec, but we'll talk about when you apply. So I mentioned before that the reason why I wanted to get in front of you is because your sector is now open. So arts and culture, there are new dates. How many of you knew that there are new dates for arts and culture this year? Okay. So in the past, you would apply February 1st to May 31st, and you would get your notification by the end of August. It's now been shortened to April 30th. And I'll talk about the reason why in a sec, is sport, arts and culture and sport both applied to us at the same time. And so essentially what that meant was the customer service you would get would be a little bit less than you're going to get now, because there would just be so many applications coming in from two sectors at the same time. We've staggered them by a month now, and that's actually going to give our analysts a little bit more time to devote to each sector. So you're going to get more support if there's any issues with your application, if there's any questions you have. We'll have a bit more time as a team to reach out to you, or you to phone us. We'll have a bit more time to talk you through it. So you'll also get your money a little bit earlier, which is always also nice. A couple tips here. When you apply, the earlier you apply, the better off you are in terms of the quicker you will get your money. 12-week turnaround on average is how long it usually takes from the date you apply to the date you would get the funding or the notification. So if you wait until April 30th, same thing as if you'd waited until May 31st before, it's going to take you longer, and if there's any issues, it's less likely we're going to have the time to be able to support you. So the earlier you can apply, the better. Okay, all the other sectors are kind of probably not of as much interest. So how do you apply? Online, through our website. There is the application form. When you get to our website, you'll see a button in the corner that says online service. That's where you go to apply. Those of you who have done the online application before, you've probably noticed that it's a bit clunky. Okay, I'm trying to be diplomatic here.
It's extremely retro.
Yeah, partying like it's 1999.
It's kind of refreshing now,
Yeah.
actually.
So we don't own it. We don't control that technology. All we can do is make recommendations, and if you have any suggestions, I'm certainly happy to hear them, but it is what it is for now. Some tips to at least help you with the process itself is use the information on our website. We've got pre-application checklists. So before you even go to this link, go to just the main page of our website, and there's a pre-application checklist. Like, it's all the things you need to gather before you even do the application. It's like, okay, oh yeah, that's right, I need a budget, I need this, I need that. Check them all off, make sure you have them. Program description, right, I need to get that. So it's just a good heads up. We have financial statements on the website, and I can show you any of these if you like afterwards. FAQs and tutorials. The tutorial is good because it'll actually walk you through section by section how you actually do it. Have all these things ready in advance, and you're good to go. Okay. So you've gone through all this. You're eligible. Yeah, sorry.
Can I just ask one
Yeah,
question?
sure.
Because I haven't submitted one in the past couple of years. Someone else has for our organization. But is it still that you have to complete the whole thing at once, or you can't save anything and then go back to it? It's still
Clunky, right?
Okay.
You write it
Okay.
down
Yeah.
beforehand,
Yeah.
and then you cut and paste.
Exactly.
That's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Do
yeah.
your
Just, yeah.
Yeah.
As long as I know that again.
Yeah. The biggie is going to be the program description. Like that's the part that seems to take people the most amount of time. Like the rest of it, there's a lot of them filling in administrative boxes and stuff. But do your program description, do those big things in advance, and that's why the checklist is so important, because it tells you, gives you that advice what to do. And you don't have to put the program description in the online application. Like there's a box you can type in. It limits you to 4,000 characters, not words. Do it as a separate attachment. Attach it. You know, you do that anytime. You know, have it ready, have it good to go, and then when you get to the application, just click attach. Save yourself 10 minutes right there. Okay. So you've gone through all that. You put in your application, you waited your 12 weeks, and you get a notification. You're going to get a grant notification letter from the branch, which is going to have one of two things. It's either going to have fantastic news, which hopefully for all of you it has been. You ask for this, here's what you get, good to go. Or you'll get a notification that says, okay, mostly you got what you wanted. Or you'll get a notification letter that will deny you. Hopefully none of you will have that. So one of those three situations will occur: full funding, partial funding, or denied funding. So you have an opportunity, if you're unhappy with the decision, it's not the end of the road, you can apply for a reconsideration of that decision. If you think there was an error that was made in the assessment of your application, or you disagree with the decision that was made, you can apply for a reconsideration. So what you need to do is you have 30 days to submit a formal request to the branch to get it reconsidered. So do it by email. Don't do it by mail. That's going to take you days, right? And the clock's ticking. Send an email to our branch, and I'll give you the URL in a sec, or the email address in a sec, and say that you would like to submit this formal reconsideration. So what you need to do is when you submit this reconsideration, you have to identify the things in the notification letter that you disagree with, right? So don't just say, I disagree with the decision, please look at it again. Tell us what you disagree with and why you think it's wrong, okay? So what some people do is they'll say, oh, it's wrong because I forgot to give the budget. Okay, whose fault is that? Okay. If you forgot to submit it, unfortunately you're out of luck there, so you can't submit new information or new documents that are part of it. So make sure when you submit it, everything is complete in its entirety. That's on you guys to make sure you do that. So you've done all this, you've submitted the formal reconsideration. Our executive director or our director will look at it, and they will refer back to the notes from the analyst. They'll look back at all the information that was provided, and they'll start again. And then oftentimes they'll sit down with the analyst, or they'll ask them to say, okay, well, how did you come into this decision? And then they'll make the executive decision as to whether they think that was a valid decision or whether it needs to be varied. And sometimes it'll be varied, and they'll come back and say, you know what, I agree with you that that decision was incorrect, and we're going to do X instead. So it could be happy days for an organization, or the decision could be the same. Either way, you're going to get a clear explanation as to why that final decision was made. So when you get that final decision you'll get it within 90 days of you submitting your request. That will be the final decision for that year. Yeah.
Is there any chance that the decision will, the amounts granted will go down?
Not likely. Not as likely as it would be to go up, right? Yeah. There's always a possibility, but it's not as likely. Yeah. So you're the one that's going to have to make that choice. Like, are we okay with this, or is there potential we're putting ourselves more at risk by making that application for recon? Yeah.
Do you still have this cycle of long application, short, long. When you do short, then you don't ask for more money or different.
Yeah. Does everybody know the difference between a short application and a long? Okay. So the long application is just the full application that you would get on through the website. The short application is we go through a 5-year cycle. And so after a couple years, if you submitted your applications and everything is good, and you're not requesting an increase of any sort, then you can revert to doing a short application for 1 or 2 years. It's basically, we got all your information. Why do we need to keep asking you all these same things again? So you can revert to a shorter form, and the application will prompt you. It'll say, okay, supposed to. It will know where you're at in this queue of 5 years, and it'll bump you to the short one if you're at that point. What will happen, though, is if you submit, for example, a request for a reconsideration, that puts you back at the start of the 5-year cycle, and you now have to do a long form again. So that's one of the things you have to consider if you're thinking about a recon, is it may put you back into the start of that queue. So what I would say to that point is, if you just have questions about the decision that was made, and if you don't want to request a formal reconsideration of it, but you just like some clarity on it, like I didn't quite understand this decision, you don't have to do a reconsideration. Pick up the phone, give me a call, or give our general line a call, or send us an email and say, can I just talk to somebody please about this? I need to understand it better so that next year I know how to be more compliant. Do that instead. We get people that request things, make requests for reconsideration, and you look at it and say, actually all you wanted was just some help. And it's just, why go through that process unless you really need to? Does that answer your question?
I'm surprised by, you said it's a 5-year cycle. I
Yeah.
thought it was a 3-year cycle.
No, it's 5.
It's 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is that new for this year?
No, it's, what section is that? It's in the guidelines.
You're only allowed to do 2 shorts, and then you had to do another long.
Yeah.
So it's not.
Yeah.
So it's a 3-year cycle.
Well, yeah. I'll dig it up for you. We'll take a look at it at the end, but it shows it goes year 1 through 5. It's the first 2 years is long, 3 and 4 is short, then long.
Okay.
I'll have to show it to you. It'll make more sense if you can see it.
But over
Yeah.
5.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
2 shorts and 3 longs in there.
Yeah. You could end up doing like 1 short and then have to go back to the long. So like if you did a short form and then at the end of it you requested a reconsideration, you're back to long. And now you're back at year 1.
Can I just clarify that you could do a short if your thing comes up that you can do short.
Yeah.
If you're not asking for an increase. Now, is that an increase that you increase above what you requested in the last one, or what you got?
Increase above what you're asking for.
Asking.
Yeah, and the reason there is quite simple. It's like if you're requesting more money, you need to be able to demonstrate for us why you're going to.
Yeah.
And the short form, it wouldn't have that, right? So
Right. But if you didn't
Yeah.
get what you asked for the year before,
there's no increase.
then you
Yeah.
you don't want to request just that amount again. You want to request what your original request was.
Yeah, so put it this way, if there's anything that is different about your application from 1 year to the next, if there's supplemental information that you need to provide to us, and it could even be things like, we had less money last year than we asked for, and this year we want to go back to what we used to have, you need to be able to explain that to us, right? And you can't do that on the short form. And the same thing is like if there's changes to your constitution or your bylaws, or you get a whole new slate of board of directors, or if there's any new documentation you need to provide to us, that's the long form. You would have to go back and do that.
I think what she's asking is like, so in 2017 you asked for 50 grand, but you only got 25. Can you in 2018 still apply for 50 grand? Because that's what you asked for in 17, but you only got 25.
You can, provided the description and everything you need to do, like there's nothing new, there's nothing unique to that.
Yeah, you still
Yeah.
value,
Yeah.
your program's at 50, but you only just got
Yeah.
25.
Yeah, no.
Great.
Put it this way, the long application is to your benefit if there's something new and unique that you need to, present to us or explain to us. Okay. Any other questions on recon or short or long? Yep.
So in the original notification letter, there will be reasons why the amount is less than what you would ask for?
Yeah, yeah. The letters are quite, they're quite detailed, right? As to, for X program, you ask for this amount of money, and it's like, great, here's your money. Or if it's a partial amount, there will be an explanation of, for example, it could be these particular things that you said you were going to do in the program were actually ineligible, and they'll point you to the part of the guidelines that said ineligible uses of funds are X, Y, and Z. So those parts you can't use it for, but you can use it for this. So it's quite particular in terms of that. So and now you're actually getting into the part about compliance, which is the last part here. So technically the last part of the eligibility is you got your grant, you've spent the money, now you need to report back to us how you actually spent the money. So your grant, the notification letter will tell you, here's what we approve you spend it on, go ahead and do it. And then at the end of your fiscal year, when you report back to us, you need to demonstrate to us, here's what we told you could spend it on, what did you spend it on? So, types of things you can spend it on are anything that is an operational cost that's associated with the direct delivery of your program or service. So that could be, I don't know, let's think of an example here. Somebody works in the office and does all the paperwork for the organization. Part of their wages could be a suitable use of the funds. Utilities, heat, rent, those types of things. Let's say you have to purchase photocopier paper or a photocopier. The portion of the program, the portion of the organization, let's say the organization has to purchase the photocopier, the portion of the organization that's attributable to that program, that's how much you can bill to that program. We spent $3,000 on a photocopier. What percentage of the organization is devoted to that program, and you prorate the cost. Does that make sense? Okay. If you have to rent or purchase equipment to deliver your program, that's good. Same thing I mentioned earlier, like you need to purchase or rent a van to get people from one place to the other to put on a program. That's an eligible use of funds. Or travel essential to the direct delivery of the program within BC. So if you need to get your organization is here, but where you're putting on the festival is in the interior, you got to get there, right? So that's an eligible use of funds. But what wouldn't be an eligible use of funds is travel, let's say for the organization to go to an AGM or a conference or a workshop. That isn't, because that's of direct benefit to the organization as opposed to the people that will take part in the program or the service. You have to get to the event to put it on. That's how the community will benefit. You have to get to an AGM. That's going to benefit the organization, not the public. Okay.
Question here. For the 25% contribution to the program you mentioned, if we use volunteer time as in-kind, can that be included in the submitted application financials? Does it need to be in the past year financial statements?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's in the financials. It's in the revenue and expenses. So like I mentioned, there's resources on the website where they can add up the number of volunteer hours. And when they get that number and they take that number plus any donated equipment, labor, those types of things, add up the cost of all those things. They put it in their revenue and expenses statement. And it is both a revenue to the organization because it's income. People are providing these things positively to the organization, but it's also expenses against the organization later. So they balance out. Okay. Yeah.
Just a question around wages of existing paid positions. So if the program is delivered by someone who's already on staff, their duties, change to focus on that particular program, so that would be eligible. Mm-hmm. What if it's like the position is distinct and someone new is hired every year, say, to do it, or someone comes on contract to deliver that?
Yeah, hire a summer student to do whatever. We're not funding the person, we're funding the position. Okay, as long as the position is still in effect, that's fine. But say, for example, Mary did it last year, and this year it's John that does it. We're funding the organization to pay for John last year and Mary this year. Okay, but if John did it last year, now all of a sudden we need Mary to help John, Mary's not eligible because she hasn't been in the second position for a year. Okay.
What if you've had somebody in a volunteer position who's been vital to the delivery of the program, and now you need to convert that to a paid position? That's a position that's pre-existing, but now you're needing to monetize it. How?
Yeah, so the organization has to cover that for the first year. So the organization, we won't fund newly paid positions, and that would be similar to Mary,
Okay,
right? So Mary was a volunteer, and now we're bringing in Mary to help John.
right.
You have to pay for Mary for that first year, and then the second year you can apply for her plus John.
So would then, going back to the summer student, like I've got a couple of summer students coming in this year, and one of them is going to be teaching a summer camp, and I'm wanting to start a youth program in the fall. So then she's going to be paid for the summer camp through the summer student program. Would that count as a paid position? Because she's going to be doing the same sort of work
If
in
it's,
the fall.
yeah, are you considering this whole thing across the whole year as one big program?
Yeah, it'll be youth education, youth mentorship.
So she's involved in 2 different seasons. Okay. Or the position,
yes, it will be,
the
yes,
position is.
I beg your pardon, sorry.
Or let's just say the position,
Yes, it's
spans
sort of
the
like a
year.
youth leader.
okay. It's the same thing, it still has to be 12 months within that whole cycle.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
have to have 12 months of her being paid, doing this youth work, and then we can.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't need to just be her, it just needs to be that position,
Yes,
whoever's in the position.
but
You
we
need to
can
cover it
count
for a year.
summer student grant as being paid, and then we pick up the slack for the other parts of it. We can count that.
I would need to sit down with you and look at that.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
You're good? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we're almost at the end. And then I have some specific questions that you folks submitted that I'll answer for you. Okay, sort of administrative stuff. When you get the grant, again, like I said, you give us a void check, money goes into that account, and that is your dedicated gaming account. So what you're supposed to do, the ideal situation is, any expenses you have, program expenses, you pay for it from that gaming account with the money that we put in. But let's say, for example, in your particular case, you're going to apply now. Let's say you apply March 31st, you get your money, but you got expenses towards whatever it is that you do now in advance of getting the funds. What do you do in that particular situation? You're perfectly welcome to take money from your operating account to pay those expenses and then reimburse it with the gaming account funds later. So covered off, but what you need to do is reimburse your operating account with the gaming funds when you get it. Make sure that you document those expenses. Make sure there's that paper trail. And you're going to submit something at the end of your year called the Gaming Account Summary Report. Show of hands, how many of you have done this? Okay, so that's just the reconciliation of how you spent the money. And what you would do on that Gaming Account Summary Report, you would say March 31st, or actually let's say April 31st, reimbursed operating account for X expense. So we need to know where that money came from. So you're going to get 12 months from the receipt of the funds to spend the money. And if at the end of that 12 months, let's say you got $12,000, end of that 12 months, you got $7,000 left over, it's like, okay, wow, we're supposed to spend it all. You need to get in touch with us and let us know, and we'll figure out a plan for moving ahead with that. Yeah?
So what we've been doing in the past on our GASR for reimbursing operating account funds is we've been doing a letter that was signed by 2 members of the board authorizing us to do that. Do we have to go that far, or does it just have to be a note within the GASR saying we reimbursed our operating fund for these expenditures?
So anytime you do that, is this a regular thing, or like are there recurring things that? Okay.
It's almost always that we have some expenditures that we have to reimburse because we had to
There's a
pay
gap.
before
Yeah.
we got the gaming funding.
Yeah. For each of those, you should provide that notification, right? So okay, we had to take the money from here to pay this, and then we reimbursed it. John and Mary on the board, here's their signature on that.
Thanks.
There's other things too, like let's say recurring costs like heat and light. If you pay those things through like a automatic withdrawal from your bank account. What you would do on your gasser is you would look at your bank statement, and it'll give it like an electronic file transfer number, and you would actually put that actually in the gasser report and say, okay, March 31st, BC Hydro bill, put the electronic file transfer number in there and the amount. Okay. If anybody wants, I can show you the gasser at the end. Okay. It's very exciting.
About the gaming accounts in your report, usually the deadline is that we have to submit it three months after the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah.
Although I always felt like, let's do it early and then attach it to the application. Is that?
Yeah, you're welcome to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, provided you spent the money and it's all accounted for, right? Yeah, you're welcome to do that. Yeah. Yeah, it's supposed to be done within 90 days, and we actually have a naughty list of people that don't. And again, we're not out to penalize people. If there's egregious examples of organizations that have 2, 3, 4 years in a row haven't done it, it's very likely they're not going to continue to get funded, right? So it's in your best interest to make sure you stay current on those. So just the last point I want to make about this is invoices and receipts. So when you do your accounting at the end of the year and you fill in this report, you don't need to give us all the receipts. I actually got a gaming account summary report from an organization a few days ago. It was 73 pages long.
Oh my God.
I'm like, this is like a 6-page document. What's going on here? It was every single invoice and bank statement. I said, I don't need it. Okay. An auditor might need it. Okay, keep it in a shoebox, keep it organized, because there is a possibility at some point, every year they audit randomly a bunch of organizations, or ones that we say are naughty, and then they'll start looking through it to make sure that it's properly accounted for. But we don't need to see it. We trust you. Most of you. Okay. Okay.
And would really prefer you don't get 6 dozen-page reports.
Good Lord. And then I had to send it all back. Okay. All right. So there's a section in the guidelines called the grant conditions. That essentially is basically that's your lowercase contract, I guess you could call it. It's a description of all the things that you're responsible for doing as a successful grant applicant. And so that's Appendix 8 in the back of this. It's important that you know what is in those conditions. And it's a bunch of things. It's like, you have to have the gaming account. You have to, let's see here. Oh, there's even an acknowledgement of the province of BC in any materials that you produce, which is also mentioned here. That's just kind of a matter of courtesy. Acknowledge the province for any funds they provided. Doesn't need to be a big splashy thing. Just provide that acknowledgement. We've got a whole bunch of financial stuff in here. Things like make sure you complete the gaming account summary report, make sure you retain all your records in case you're audited, that sort of thing. I'll let you read through that at your leisure. So the important part there is the letter that you get, the notification letter, will speak to a lot of those conditions. We're giving you this money on this condition. So follow those conditions, and you should be, unless there's something that's gone totally screwy with the organization in the future in terms of eligibility or whatever, if you adhere to those conditions, you're in good standing with the branch for the next application. Okay. So that's pretty much the end. I just wanted to point out some key resources for you. And again, if you, in order to better understand the program, go to our website, Gaming Grants, HTTP, that should say HTTPS, by the way, gov.bc/gaming grants. You can find everything you need to know about. You'll find a copy of the guidelines. You'll find all the tutorials, FAQs, all those types of things there. Any general questions that you have or anything that you need to submit, like your gasser, for example, you do it through the general Gaming Grants email address, or you can give them a call. If you want to reach out to me in particular, you can see my email address there. I'm happy to chat with any of you. There's also 2 organizations that we work with out in the field. I mentioned earlier that we do have people that can provide like sort of sit-down sort of support, a little bit more tangible support to you in terms of applications and understanding the process. So the BC Association for Charitable Gaming or the Community Charitable Gaming Associations, those are a good contact. There is a Fraser Valley chapter, which basically covers all the metro. And you can reach out to them through the BCACG website if you have any very specific questions or you want like a little bit extra roll up the sleeves kind of support. They can help you there. And we also have a relationship with the BC Association of Aboriginal Friendship Centers. They work directly with Indigenous organizations on our behalf to help applicants. So that's pretty much the guidelines. That's pretty much the program. Time for questions. And like I said, I did get a bunch of questions in advance. And I'd like to address those. And if you have any additional ones or the answer I give you, you need a little bit more clarity on, I'm certainly happy to provide more details. So I'll just sort of read through what we've got here. Is that okay, Jace?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Any more coming in yet?
Not at the moment.
Okay. All right, so the first question was, what is the official policy towards co-productions between organizations who receive grant funds? That's actually where I thought your question was going.
Yeah,
One of them
no.
earlier. Okay.
That was just a capital
Okay.
project.
So that's okay. If you partner with another organization to put on a festival or a season or whatever the case may be, that's totally fine. But we're only going to get one application from you. So one of the organizations, 2, 3, whatever, only one of those organizations would submit the application, and they're the lead for it. So you guys would be responsible within your organizations to figure out how you want to present that in terms of the financials, in terms of the program description, and one of you submits that.
So
Yeah.
I think that just to, that's actually addressing something. For example, the Push Festival does lots of partnerships with lots of arts organizations in the city as part of their festival. And so our program is our big program of 24 things we do in a year. One of those things we might do with Push. So it's not that we're doing our entire program with them. There's one show that we might be doing with Push.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, I'm guessing that question is more about that kind of a situation rather than an entire program being co-presented with another person.
So one of the 24 you do with the partner organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, the question was
Yeah.
actually from me, and
Yeah.
it really does have to do with organizations like, for instance, if Playwrights Theatre Centre is working with Vancouver Asian Canadian Theatre, and we work, like each of us independently apply for gaming funding, and the programs that we apply for can overlap, but they might not be like it's like VACT might apply for a program, and as far as gaming is concerned, they organize their programs in a certain way, and PTC organize their programs in a different way. But some of these things overlap, or maybe even if they don't overlap, but the organizations work together,
Yeah.
they almost overlap. How do we best apply for this and without making us ineligible for some funding?
So what you need to do is you need to present the case to the branch that what we want to avoid is funding 2 different organizations doing the same thing. So whatever the area of overlap is, that needs to be clearly communicated to us so that we know who to fund and how much. Because if we get an application from you and another application from them and there is that overlap, if we don't know what that overlap is, we're double panning. We want to avoid that.
So what if we're, like for instance, this is getting very nitty-gritty, but let's say within these 2 programs, we have 2 staff members, one of each organization, whose part of their salary would be eligible for funding. So are you saying that PTC would have to apply to then pay the artistic director of Vancouver Asian Canadian Theatre? Or do you know what I mean? Like if this program is paying staff of each organization, could both organizations apply and say, and refer to the other organization's application and say, you know, this is a program that is that's like a Venn diagram program between the 2 of them. We're not double dipping on expenditures. We're not at all double dipping, but the program is a joint program.
Yeah, we just need to see a clear line of sight between what we're providing the funding for and where it actually ends up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it would need to be presented to us as, okay, what are the linkages between this and that?
Okay.
Okay, so that's another one of those examples of, without actually seeing it, it's hard to give you a direct answer. It's just, it's incumbent upon you as the organization to work with them to say, what is it you do, what is it we do, how do we coordinate this so the branch has the clear picture and can fund it appropriately.
So at least
Okay.
in the spirit of the policy, as long as the expenditures are not, like two organizations are not applying for double dipping funding for the exact same expenditure,
Yeah.
that would be legitimate.
Yeah, because again, it's like we're looking at it as ultimately, where's the benefit for all this going? It's the community's the benefit, right? So what do you need to do to put on whatever you do, and what are the aspects of the program that need to be funded, and who's involved, right? So this is the part where this is going to be important for you, is the program description,
Yeah.
and also the section within the application called use of funds, and that's a bit more of an itemized breakdown. You need to explain what those linkages are in there.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I hope that answered the question. Okay. Some of these are tricky without actually seeing it. So, and again, the other thing that you need to understand is my role is just to provide you that advice, right? Like, I'm not giving you a definitive decision. That's what the analysts do, right? I'm just trying to help you position that properly. Okay. So this question was actually asked several times. Why are programs that benefit artists not considered a public benefit? We're not actually saying that. Okay, they are a benefit. It's just not a direct benefit. And I'll walk you through a bunch of the things in there that say ultimately it's the public that needs to benefit, not the artist or the writer or whoever it is. Okay, so section 3.3 of the guidelines speaks to that. It says that this program does not, is the intent of this program, and it never has been, is not to primarily support the artist or artistic development. It's to support the public's appreciation and access of it. So if the support for the artist itself is what's really important to you, that's what BC Arts Council is for, as opposed to this program. That being said, it's not like if you're putting on a theater production and you need to hire an artist to actually, be the artistic director or to paint sets or whatever, that's fine. You can put some of the money towards that, but you're funding the artist to do the program. You're not funding the artist. Okay. Artists are.
So it's a
yeah.
program that it's about the focus of the program being to benefit the general public, and the general public can include the community of artists.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're a client as opposed to the recipient of the funding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Artists are citizens, also known as members of the public, and are no more of a special interest group than soccer teams. What is the rationale for the difference in funding arts and culture versus community programs? So section 3.3 of our guidelines identifies 6 different sectors that we provide funding to, and I mentioned that in one of the early slides. So each of those sectors is unique. Each of those delivers different programs, does different things, serves a different audience. So it makes sense that each of them has slightly different criteria behind how we fund them. So to say that we would approach how we would fund a soccer organization versus an arts and culture organization differently, absolutely we do, because they do different things. But what's important to understand there with that is, and it speaks to the community benefit, there was another question there, it's like the sense that we're actually narrowing what we consider to be a definition of community benefit. We actually aren't. Like, the definition of community benefit that's in the guidelines hasn't changed since 2014. What has changed, though, is how we interpret it. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but in 2016 we actually were audited by the Office of the Auditor General. And what they said was, you guys need to do a better job. One of the things they said was, you need to do a better job of actually applying the definition of community benefit across the sectors. Because there was a bit of a, oh, that's pretty good, or that needs to be a little tighter. It's like, this is what the definition says, we expect you to adhere to that. So some of you, if some groups say your definition is narrowing, it isn't. It's actually the application of the definition that's been the same since 2014. Yeah?
What if, it's something that you rarely do, but you're working with emerging artists. Then you find that one artist would maybe benefit of a little bit of working an afternoon with a mentor. And then the end result is the artist is presented in a show, but more prepared to be presented in a show. So is that
would,
then there is community benefit because there is a show at the end of the day, right?
yeah, but it's not direct. So the direct benefit there is the artist, right? Okay, so then the artist maybe can put on a better presentation down the road, but that's not the direct line of sight. So you'd approach BC Arts Council for that. Okay, and then the artist has now improved his or her professional ability. Then the organization can apply to us and say, we want this artist to help us put on this production because now he or she is really good. Okay. Okay. Why are educational or professional development opportunities not considered of direct benefit? I think I just answered that with your question there. Because there's no direct line of sight between our funds and the public. Okay, so the other nuance here is, so the funding can't go for the professional development of the artist, the writer, or whomever. But if you put on a production that requires a whole bunch of volunteers to help build sets and do stuff like that, but you need to train them on how to do it, funding can be used for that. It just can't be used for that professional development of paid professionals. It can be used towards volunteers. So it's important you get that distinction. And another question I got a few times here.
Sorry, can you edge that? I
Oh.
think more information about that.
Okay.
So do you mean, okay, because often we have professionals in our community who are sometimes would be considered volunteers and sometimes would be considered paid professionals. So if we're offering professional development to people who we do not pay to be professionals, are they then considered volunteers?
Have to see it. Yeah. So I'm just trying to think of an example here. Yeah. Without giving you an actual example, because that would be good for them. But basically, I think the way I would approach that is if the funds go to the individual, full stop, they benefit. If it goes to that professional to help put on the production, that is okay. So that professional could be volunteering their time. But let's say they're professional doing this, right? But it's like, okay, you're a professional artist, but I want you to help volunteer to put on this production. We can use some of the funds to actually pay your supplies and equipment and that type of stuff you need to help put on the production.
And then does the production have to be something that we fund? Or could it be a production that the culture funds? Like we support them in this professional development so that they can then be in a production that the culture's funding.
We don't fund productions, but
Yeah.
I would need to know the relationship there. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You and I have some things to talk about offline, I think.
Probably.
You gotta, yeah. This was an interesting question, and okay. So we are concerned that submitting a request for an increase can actually put us at a risk of a cut. Okay, so no, we're not going to penalize an organization for asking for an increase. Like if you can present the case that you deserve or you need the additional funding, like if the size and the scope of the program that you provide to us demonstrates that you need it, it's presented that way in the application, you're very likely to get the additional funding. You're not going to get cut for needing more money. And this was a good one too. Is there a better way for us to make specific equipment requests that will not take away from the funding to our programs? So it costs you $30,000 to run your program, and that's what you've asked for every year. But we actually need, remember I said that you can get an additional $20,000? We need that additional $20,000 on top because everything's falling apart. How do we do this? So you submit a request for 50. And in that request for 50, you actually break it down in the program description. We're asking for the same amount to run the program. Here's what the program is, here's what it does. And we also are requesting an additional $20,000 as a one-time top-up because we need the following additional things. So it's pretty much as simple as that. And when requesting funds for new equipment, computers, chairs, etc., should the equipment request be itemized in a separate program? No, like I just said, it's still one program. It's just a cost to run that program, to deliver it. So just break it down. We need 30,000 to run the program for these things, and we need 20,000 to repair the roof, to upgrade this, to do that. And if you feel like 20,000 isn't enough, remember you've got that other program that you could potentially apply for, the capital program with the 50 grand. So that's the questions I got. Did you get any others?
No, I haven't
Okay.
received any more.
Okay.
So if anyone in the room has any questions?
Yeah.
I just have a quickie. When you had the slide up about the acknowledgement of the acknowledge, does that have to be on every piece of sort of public document that the organization produces, even though it has nothing to do with the actual program that's being funded?
No, use your discretion on that. Like, it's just a matter of courtesy, right? Like, we
I mean, we want to
Yeah.
recognize it, but
Yeah.
it wouldn't make sense on some.
No, and we don't have acknowledgement police that are going to follow you around and check to make sure you do it. But what we do request is if you're a bigger organization, and like this applies to organizations that are like regional or provincial that get like quite significant levels of support, there's actually like a logo and different types of things that we would ask those organizations to do. But you know, if that's not who you are, just the occasional acknowledgement is fine. And again, it's just kind of a matter of courtesy more than anything. Yeah.
Thank you for the workshop. It's always very useful to refresh our memory. The theme was what's new for 2018, and it seems to me that there is a lot of continuity. I haven't heard anything that's very significant change, or would you agree with that?
Just really just two things. The two big things are the change in date, and just to reiterate that, so February 1st to April 31st is, or
April 30th.
30 days, that's September.
30 days.
Okay. So, and so you a little bit of abbreviated time to get that application in. And the other one was the part about deferred revenues. Hopefully that's potentially some good news for people. Now that that's considered to be a liability as an asset, that could potentially reduce the surplus amount for an organization. And the rest of it was just largely just an opportunity just to refresh the guidelines for you and answer any questions you have. And again, I'm happy to stick around if you want to chat offline more specifically. Yeah.
I have another, so this is kind of a big picture question, but I'm interested to just dialogue about it, especially around my other colleagues, because I know that the gaming does not nominally give operational funding. However, gaming does fund programs over many years. So it's, at least for us as an organization who've existed for 30 years or more, that it becomes kind of, it becomes really complicated and difficult to work within a system that nominally is not operating, is not funding operation, like operating funding, but really in practice is funding the same programs over many, many years. So is this something that there is is there a way to make this like more efficient, or is there any kind of desire to change the model so that there's an acknowledgement of like programs that are unchanged over 30 years that are being funded at consistent levels? Is there a way to kind of acknowledge this within the granting system?
So we actually have a survey that's out right now. How many of you received an email with a link to take part in a survey about the program? Okay. Well, you hopefully will this week. So I just realized, I remember that we actually sent it out to a small 1,000 organizations to begin with, and this week it's supposed to go out en masse. So we have created a survey. We've used BC Stats to engage with you on this program. So basically the survey is, what do you think of the program? What do you think of the guidelines? Are we capturing the right things? Do we have the right model? Do we have the right framework? What do you think of the application form? All those types of things are in the survey, so we're looking for input on anything and everything having to do with the Gaming Grants program. So you look for that email, whether it goes to you directly or to whoever is the lead on your application for your organization. Whatever the email is on file, that's who the survey will go to. So we're looking for your input on what you think about that program. So that would be your opportunity there to provide that feedback. And there's also lots of open fields in there too, like if we didn't capture within a question what is of importance to you and what's top of mind, there's lots of fields where you can submit that. So
Is this a
yeah.
particular area that gaming is considering making changes in?
We're considering making changes on what makes sense to the program and what makes sense to the clients. So that's why it's going out to the 5,500 or whatever it is, 5,500 organizations that we fund. And there's 26,000 not-for-profit organizations across the province. We're trying to hit everybody, right? So whatever we hear, that's going to be analyzed and sort of say, are we checking the right boxes here, or what adjustments do we need to make? Because this is public money, right? We want to make sure we're spending it wisely and we're spending it on things that make the most sense to the not-for-profits. Okay, so I hope that will be an opportunity for you to share your thoughts. Any other questions? Yep. Yep.
Last year we were told that we could include board hours in the volunteer hours. I just want to make sure that that's still true. We kind of include the volunteer hours that our board puts in for meetings and various other meetings.
Yeah, well, board members, if they actually volunteer towards the delivery of the program, that's fine. But in terms of the governance part, that's a different thing. Yeah. Okay.
Quick question here.
Yes.
Will there be an opportunity to respond to the survey if we haven't applied for gaming before?
If you're if you're a not-for-profit organization within BC, you should get that survey. And if for whatever reason, if we miss an organization that's a not-for-profit, they can reach out to the branch and we can see if we can get you that survey. Yeah.
If there are no more questions, then I think we can wrap things up. So thank you so much, Mike, for coming to talk to us today.
Okay, thanks.